She has no idea we recorded everything." Those 7 words stopped my heart. I was standing in the hallway of my own home, the house I had lived in for 35 years, carrying a tray of iced tea. My son and daughter were in the sunroom, their voices low but sharp. I froze, my back pressed against the floral wallpaper. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the coldness in my son's voice held me captive. "Once she signs the updated trust on the cruise, the transition will be seamless," he continued. Then my daughter chimed in, her tone sounding like she was discussing a chore rather than a human being. "It's for the best. She's becoming so forgetful. If we don't streamline this now, the state will take a cut of everything Dad left behind." My hands began to shake, the ice cubes rattling against the glass. I realized then that they weren't talking about my comfort or my health. They were talking about my exit. They were preparing my will while I was still standing in the next room, breathing and capable. The betrayal felt like a physical weight, pressing down on my chest until I could hardly breathe. I retreated silently, the iced tea forgotten on the hall table. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 65 years old, and for 30 years I worked as a senior forensic accountant for the federal government. I spent my life looking at numbers that didn't add up, and finding the people who thought they were smart enough to hide them. I am a widow, having lost my husband 6 years ago to a sudden heart attack. Since then, I have lived a quiet life in our suburban home, tending to my garden and keeping my own books. People often look at a woman my age and see a fading flower. They see someone who needs help with her phone, or someone who might get confused at the grocery store. My children, Julian and Brooke, clearly made that mistake. They saw a grandmother who baked cookies and wore sensible shoes. They forgot that I was trained to see through lies. They forgot that I had spent decades dismantling financial conspiracies far more complex than a family inheritance scam. As I sat in my darkened office that evening, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I pulled out a fresh yellow legal pad. I was going to audit my children, and the results were going to be devastating. The plan started with a gift. 3 weeks ago, Julian brought me a brand new laptop. He told me my old one was sluggish and that he wanted me to have something faster for my upcoming 65th birthday cruise. He offered to recycle my old machine for me. At the time, I thought it was a sweet gesture. Now, looking at the empty space on my desk, where my old computer used to sit, I realized his true motive. That old laptop contained every password, every bank account, and every detail of the secondary investment accounts my husband had set up for our retirement. Julian didn't want me to have a faster computer. He wanted my data. He wanted to see exactly how much was in the hidden accounts before he moved in for the kill. I felt a surge of cold fury. He thought I was tech illiterate enough to just hand over my entire financial life. Fortunately for me, I had always been paranoid. I had an encrypted backup drive hidden inside a hollowed-out book on my shelf. I plugged it into the new laptop Julian gave me, but first, I ran a deep scan for tracking software. Sure enough, he had installed a keylogger. He was watching every stroke I made. Finding the keylogger was the confirmation I needed. It wasn't just a casual conversation I overheard, it was a coordinated attack. I decided to play the game. If they wanted a confused, aging mother, I would give them a performance worthy of an Oscar. I spent the next few days acting slightly off. I would start a sentence and trail off. I would ask Brooke where I put my glasses, when they were clearly on top of my head. I watched as they exchanged the look, that sympathetic, knowing glance that signaled they thought I was slipping away. It was sickening. Brooke started coming over every day to help me declutter. She spent most of her time in the attic in my home office, rummaging through old files. One afternoon, I caught her looking through a blue folder I had never seen before. It was tucked under a stack of my late husband's old tax returns. When she saw me, she jumped and shoved it back into the box. "Just looking at some old photos, Mom," she chirped. Her voice was an octave too high. I smiled vacantly and told her I was going to make some toast. I knew exactly where she hid that folder. That night, after Brooke left, I retrieved the blue folder. My heart pounded as I opened it under the glow of a flashlight. Inside was a draft for a restructured living trust. It was professionally typed, but the content was horrifying. It included a document titled Declaration of Incompetency. It was already partially filled out by a doctor I didn't recognize. It cited progressive memory loss, erratic financial behavior, and loss of executive function. They were building a legal cage around me. The document stated that upon my signature, full power of attorney would transfer to Julian and Brooke. They would have the right to sell my home, manage my bank accounts, and even decide where I lived. The most chilling part was a handwritten note clipped to the back in Julian's messy scrawl. Check with Marcus about the streamline clause. Need it airtight before the ship docks. I realized then that the cruise wasn't a celebration. It was a trap. They wanted to get me out to sea, away from my friends and my usual lawyers, and pressure me into signing my life away. I took photos of every single page and put the folder back exactly as I found it. I needed to know who Marcus was. The next morning, I went to a public library across town to use a computer that Julian wasn't monitoring. I searched for Marcus Thorne and estate planning. He didn't come up as a lawyer. Instead, I found him on a forum for senior wellness consultants. He was a man with a history of being involved in contested wills and high-pressure estate sales. He wasn't a professional. He was a shark. I also looked into Julian and Brooke's current financial situations. Julian had always been a big ideas man, but my research showed his latest commercial real estate venture had collapsed, leaving him with a $400,000 debt. Brooke's luxury clothing boutique was also failing, with 3 months of back rent owed. They weren't trying to protect my future, they were trying to save their own skins. They saw my house and my retirement accounts as a life raft for their sinking ships. The betrayal felt even sharper, knowing they were willing to declare me mentally unfit just to pay off their own mistakes. I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my gut. I was going to audit them out of existence. A few days later, Brooke brought Marcus Thorne over to the house. She introduced him as a senior wellness consultant who was just there to help me organize my affairs, so I could enjoy my cruise without any stress. Marcus was a man in his late 50s with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He talked to me in a slow, patronizing voice, as if I were a child. "Eleanor," he said, leaning in close, "we just want to make sure everything is streamlined. You've worked so hard your whole life. Don't you want to let Julian and Brooke handle the boring paperwork?" I played the part perfectly. I let my gaze wander to the window. I asked him to repeat his name 3 times. I saw the triumphant look Brooke gave him. They thought it was going to be easy. What they didn't know was that I had hidden a high-end digital recorder inside a decorative vase on the coffee table. I was capturing every word of their manipulation. Marcus kept pushing the word streamline, making it sound like a luxury service rather than a legal execution. I nodded along, acting like I was considering his kind advice. After they left, I listened to the recording. It was even worse than I imagined. Once they thought I was out of earshot in the kitchen, Marcus whispered, "She's definitely far enough gone. The forgetful act is perfect for the medical report. We just need her to put the pen to the paper on the ship. Once we're in international waters, the pressure is different." Brooke laughed, a sound that used to bring me joy but now sounded like glass breaking. "I can't wait to sell this old place," she said. "The mold in the basement alone makes it a teardown. I've already contacted a developer." My home. The place where I raised them, where their father's height markings were still on the pantry door. They were calling it a teardown. I sat in the silence of my living room, clutching the recorder. The pain was deep, but it was being replaced by a sharp, calculating anger. I realized I couldn't just stop them. I had to outmaneuver them so completely that they would never be able to threaten me again. I needed an ally. Someone they didn't know I was talking to. I called my late husband's brother, Silas. Silas was a retired judge who lived 2 states away. We had always been close, but I hadn't seen him in a year. I didn't call him from my home phone or the new laptop. I bought a prepaid burner phone from a convenience store. When Silas answered, I didn't cry. I told him everything in the same tone I used to report financial fraud to the DA. I sent him the photos of the blue folder and the audio files of Marcus Thorne. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Eleanor," he finally said, his voice heavy with shock. "They aren't just planning your will, They're planning your exit. This is a coordinated conspiracy to commit elder abuse and fraud. If you sign those papers on that ship, they could have you in a locked facility within 48 hours of returning." He told me to stay quiet and keep playing the part. He said he would start working on a counter-trust that would act as a legal poison pill. If they tried to activate their POA, it would trigger a full audit of their own finances. The next week was a blur of tactical movements. I had to move my liquid assets without Julian seeing the activity on his keylogger. I used the burner phone to call my financial advisor, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had worked with my husband for decades. I told him the situation and gave him a secret code word. I instructed him to move my primary retirement funds into a charitable remainder trust that I had set up years ago but never fully funded. This trust was ironclad. Once the money was in, even I couldn't withdraw the principal, and it was completely shielded from any power of attorney Julian might hold. I also instructed Henderson to set up a secondary smaller account with just enough money to look like my total balance. I wanted Julian to see a number he thought he could steal, while the real fortune was moved behind a firewall he couldn't even see. Every night, I would sit at the laptop Julian gave me and browse for expensive cruises and luxury jewelry, making him think I was being frivolous and erratic with my spending. One afternoon, my 8-year-old granddaughter, Maya, came over to bake cookies. She was the only one in the family who didn't have an agenda. While we were measuring flour, she looked at me with sad eyes. "Grandma, why is Daddy taking your jewelry to the safe house?" I froze. I hadn't noticed any jewelry missing. "What do you mean, sweetie?" I asked softly. She shrugged. "He was in your room yesterday while you were gardening. He put your big diamond ring and the gold necklaces in a box. He told me it was a secret and that he was keeping them safe because you might lose them." My heart broke for the millionth time. Julian wasn't just waiting for the will, he was looting the house while I was still in it. He was stealing my memories, the pieces of my husband that I wanted to give to Maya one day. I realized then that I couldn't wait for the cruise to make my move. I had to start the counteroffensive now, but I had to do it invisibly. I kissed Maya's forehead and told her she was a very good helper. I waited until Julian was at work and Brooke was at her boutique. I went to my jewelry box. Maya was right. My most valuable pieces were gone, replaced by high-quality costume jewelry that looked identical to the untrained eye. Julian was a fool. He forgot that I had worked in forensics. I knew the weight, the sparkle, and the specific hallmarking of every piece I owned. I didn't call the police. That would alert them. Instead, I went to my basement. I had a small floor safe hidden under a loose tile beneath the washing machine, something my husband had installed 40 years ago. Julian didn't know it existed. Inside were the original deeds to the house and a collection of rare coins my husband had collected. I moved those to a safe deposit box at a bank my children didn't even know I used. Then, I replaced the coins in the safe with heavy washers wrapped in felt. I wanted them to feel the weight of their heist and believe they had succeeded. I was setting the stage for a spectacular fall. The birthday dinner arrived. We went to a nice steakhouse, and Julian was acting incredibly attentive. He kept filling my wine glass, hoping to dull my senses. At the end of the meal, he pulled out a gold-wrapped box. "Happy 65th, Mom," he said, his voice dripping with fake emotion. Inside wasn't a gift. It was a birthday card that held a thick stack of legal documents. "This is just the paperwork for the cruise and some updates to the house insurance," Brooke lied, her eyes darting around. "We figured we'd get the signatures out of the way now so you can just relax on the ship." I looked at the documents. It was the power of attorney. I felt the heat rising in my neck, but I forced a shaky smile. "Oh, my eyes are so tired from the candlelight," I whispered, patting Julian's hand. "It's so much text. Why don't I take this home and sign it in the morning before the car picks me up for the airport? I want to read every word of your kindness." I saw the flash of irritation in Julian's eyes, but he couldn't push me in public. That night was the longest of my life. I didn't go to my bedroom. I went to my office and pulled out the legal documents. I spent 3 hours carefully swapping out the pages. Silas had sent me a replacement contract. To anyone skimming, it looked identical. that the fine print was a masterpiece of legal revenge. Instead of granting them power of attorney, it was a document that officially acknowledged their financial debts to me. It turned every loan I had ever given them into a legally binding lien against their own assets. It also included a clause that required them to undergo a mandatory psychological evaluation if they ever attempted to contest my mental state. I used a high-quality scanner to mimic the fonts and the paperweight. I signed the documents where I needed to. But I also included a notice of resignation as their primary financial guarantor. I was cutting the umbilical cord, and I was doing it with a legal scalpel. I tucked the folder into my travel bag and waited for the sun to rise. At 8 a.m., the car arrived, but it wasn't the cruise shuttle. I had called a private transport service using my burner phone. Julian and Brooke pulled into the driveway just as I was loading my suitcase. They looked panicked. "Mom, what are you doing? The shuttle isn't supposed to be here yet," Brooke shouted. I smiled brightly, the most vacant, confused smile I could muster. "Oh, I got confused with the times. I called them early. Don't worry, the folder is on the hall table, all signed and ready for you." I pointed to the blue folder I had prepared. Julian practically ran into the house to grab it. I watched him through the window. He opened the back page, saw my signature, and let out a huge sigh of relief. He gave Brooke a thumbs up. They didn't even walk me to the car. They were too busy gloating over their victory. As the car pulled away, I didn't head to the airport. I headed to the bus station. I had a ticket to the city where Silas lived. I was disappearing, and I was leaving them with a ticking legal bomb. I spent the 4-hour bus ride watching the scenery change. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. When I arrived at Silas's house, he was waiting for me on the porch. He looked at me and didn't see a fading old woman. He saw his sister-in-law, the forensic accountant. "Is it done?" he asked. I handed him my phone, which was connected to the hidden cameras I had installed in my house before I left. We sat in his living room and watched the feed. Julian and Brooke were back at my house, popping a bottle of champagne. They were sitting at my dining room table, already dividing up my furniture. "I'm taking the dining set," Brooke said. "It'll look great in my new apartment once I sell my boutique." Julian was on the phone, likely calling the developer. "Yeah, the old lady is gone. She's on a ship for 2 weeks. We have the POA. Let's get the appraisal done tomorrow." I felt a cold satisfaction. They were celebrating a heist that hadn't actually happened. The next morning, the first reset happened. Julian went to the bank to try and access the hidden investment accounts. I watched the notification on my phone. He tried the password he had stolen from my old laptop. It failed. He tried again. Failed. On the third attempt, the account locked. He then tried to use the power of attorney he thought I had signed. I got a call from Mr. Henderson at the bank 10 minutes later. "Eleanor, your son is here with a very strange document. He's quite upset." I told Mr. Henderson to let the bank's legal department handle it. The document Julian held didn't give him access to my money. It gave the bank permission to investigate his accounts for suspicious activity. While Julian was at the bank, Brooke was at the house with the developer. She was shocked to find a man standing on the porch with a clipboard. He wasn't an appraiser. He was a representative from a private equity firm. I hadn't just moved. I had sold the house to them 2 weeks prior in a leaseback agreement. I was no longer the owner. I was a tenant, and the lease had ended the moment I moved out. The story was supposed to end there, with them broke and confused. But then I saw something on the camera feed that chilled me to the bone. Julian didn't look defeated. He looked desperate. He pulled a second folder out of his briefcase, one I had never seen before. He and Brooke huddled together. "We have to use the doctor's backup," Julian hissed. "If we can't get the money through the POA, we have to have her committed the second she steps off that boat. I've already paid Dr. Crane to sign off on the emergency hold." I realized then that they had a plan B that was far more dangerous. They weren't just after my money anymore. They were going to imprison me to cover their tracks. They had falsified an entire medical history of dementia and violent outbursts. If I had actually gone on that cruise, I would have been met at the dock by an ambulance and taken to a private psychiatric facility they controlled. The betrayal had turned from financial to predatory. They were willing to steal my literal freedom. I turned to Silas. "Who is Dr. Crane?" Silas looked into it. It turned out Dr. Sylvia Crane was a doctor for hire who specialized in providing medical testimony for families looking to seize control of elderly relatives. She had a clean record on the surface, but a trail of broken lives behind her. I realized I couldn't just stay hidden. I had to trap the doctor too. If I could prove the doctor was in on the scam, the entire incompetency case would crumble, and Julian and Brooke would face criminal charges. I decided to set a trap. I would return from my cruise early. I called Julian from the burner phone, pretending to be a representative from the cruise line. I told him I had a medical episode and was being transported to a clinic in a nearby town. I gave him the address of a professional office building that Silas owned. I told him to bring the family doctor to assess me. The meeting was set for the following afternoon. Silas and I arrived early. We set up high-definition cameras and microphones in the conference room. I sat in a chair, wearing a slightly disheveled coat and holding a handkerchief, looking every bit the confused old woman they expected. Julian, Brooke, and Dr. Crane arrived 30 minutes later. Julian looked like a vulture. Dr. Crane was a cold woman in a sharp suit. She didn't even look at my face. She just opened her laptop. "Eleanor, your children are very worried about you," she said, her voice a practiced hum of fake empathy. "They tell me you've been having episodes of paranoia, that you think people are stealing from you." I let out a shaky breath. I don't know where my jewelry went," I whimpered. Brooke leaned in. "See, doctor? She's obsessing over things that aren't there. We told her we moved them for safekeeping, but she forgets every 5 minutes." Dr. Crane nodded and slid a document across the table. "This is an emergency admission form, Eleanor. It's for a lovely wellness retreat where you can get the help you need. Julian and Brooke have already signed as your guardians. We just need you to acknowledge the transfer." I looked at Julian. "Will I be able to see Maya?" He didn't even look me in the eye. "Of course, Mom. Just sign the paper." I picked up the pen. My hand was steady as a rock. I didn't sign the paper. Instead, I looked directly at Dr. Crane. "Tell me, doctor, how much did my son pay you to skip the actual cognitive exam? Was it the $50,000 he tried to withdraw from my retirement account yesterday?" The room went dead silent. The confused look vanished from my face, replaced by the cold, analytical stare of a forensic accountant who had just found the missing decimal point. Julian's face went from pale to a sickly gray. "What are you talking about?" Julian stammered. I reached under the table and pulled out a tablet, turning it so they could see the screen. It was playing the recording of Marcus Thorne and Brooke laughing about the teardown. Then I showed them the bank logs of Julian's failed login attempts. Finally, I showed Dr. Crane the files Silas had unearthed regarding her previous clients. "This room is being recorded," I said calmly. "And my lawyer, Judge Silas Vance, is in the next room with 2 officers from the Elder Abuse Task Force." Dr. Crane didn't wait. She stood up, grabbed her bag, and tried to bolt for the door. But Silas was already there, blocking the way. Brooke started to cry. Real tears this time, but they were tears of fear, not regret. "Mom, please, we were just trying to help." I stood up, feeling taller than I had in years. "You weren't helping me, Brooke. You were hunting me." And the hunter just walked into the cage. The fallout was swift and absolute. Dr. Crane lost her medical license within a month and is currently facing multiple lawsuits from other families she defrauded. Julian and Brooke were not charged with kidnapping. The legal bar was too high, but they were charged with felony, financial fraud, and attempted elder exploitation. Because of the documents they signed at the restaurant, I was able to claw back every cent they had ever borrowed from me. I placed liens on Julian's car and Brooke's boutique. They were forced into bankruptcy. But the most significant payoff wasn't the money. It was the silence. I changed my phone number and moved permanently into a beautiful, secure condo in the city near Silas. I am no longer poor, forgetful Eleanor. I am the woman who outsmarted her own betrayal. I spend my days volunteering as a consultant for the state, helping other seniors protect themselves from streamlined scams. I am the architect of my own life again. A few months later, I saw Julian at a mandatory mediation hearing. He looked 10 years older. He tried to apologize, claiming he was under a lot of pressure. I looked at him and realized I didn't hate him anymore. I just didn't know him. He was a stranger who happened to share my DNA. I told him that I would keep a trust fund for Maya's education, but he would never touch a penny of it. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a strange sense of peace. My late husband always told me that the foundation of a building is the only thing that matters. If the foundation is cracked, the whole house will eventually fall. My children's foundation was greed, and I was the one who finally let the structure collapse. I drove back to my new home, the one with the high-tech security and the garden I designed myself. I am 66 now, and I have never felt more alive. The final lesson I learned is one I tell everyone I meet. We spend our lives building things, families, homes, fortunes. We assume that because we built them with love, they are solid. But what looks solid from the outside is not always solid where it counts. Betrayal doesn't always come from a stranger in a dark alley. Sometimes it comes from the person sitting across from you at Sunday dinner, offering you a piece of cake. I protect my heart now, but I also protect my paperwork. I require multiple signatures for everything, and I never, ever use the word streamline. If someone ever uses that word in a conversation about your life, put your pen down, stand up, and walk away. Call your lawyer. Call your own version of Silas, because the only person who should be writing the final chapter of your story is you. I kept the pen, and I'm still writing. I'm curious. If you were in my shoes, would you have ever spoken to Julian and Brooke again, or was cutting them off financially enough? And has a family member ever used the word streamline to describe your future? Let me know your story in the comments below. I'll be hearting the most strategic responses. Stories like this happen more often than we think. But you don't have to be the victim. If you enjoyed watching Wisdom Defeat Manipulation, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. We share more deep dive stories every week on how to outsmart the betrayals you never see coming. Don't let your story be written by someone else. Join our community of survivors today.